Okay, so we'll start. We've got a good panel here. Last time I did this, my name is Simon Fanshawe, by the way. The last time I did this was this time last year, and we did a panel hosted by Progress for all the leaders in the then leadership campaign, except two of the people on the panel for the campaign didn't actually stand in it, and the person who finally won it wasn't here. But set that aside, Progress as ever with its finger closely on the pulse of British politics. With 2016, quite an exciting year, possibility here of Boris Johnson being Prime Minister, Britain leaving Europe, Donald Trump being President, and Scotland finally going independent, and 2 weeks ago Jeremy Corbyn made a speech about the Co-op Party, so well done him. On the panel today, it was a cheap point and I just enjoyed it. Now, I'm sucking up to you basically so I can be rude to you in a moment. On the panel, we've got at the far end somebody who went to a wonderful university, which I went to as well and which I was subsequently chairman, Hilary Benn. He said when Jeremy won, he said, my father would have been delighted, which I think is the kind of diplomatic response that is why he should be Shadow Foreign Secretary. So. And
I thought I was, but anyway, maybe I think he means I should be foreign.
Always makes me laugh when they try and claim that Hillary's been muzzled when he made one of the great personal speeches with illustrating a difference he had with a number of other people in the cabinet. So hardly a muzzled person. Owen Jones, the next person, will be well known to you. Literally a child of the militant tendency. Both his parents were apparently in the militant tendency. Nonetheless, he escaped and went to Oxford and now writes for The Guardian. Appears on the BBC and by his own admission knows lots of people who are famous and powerful by their first names. He recently wrote a book about the establishment, about the country is run by people who went to Oxbridge, write for national newspapers. Appear on the BBC and know famous people by their first names. Ayesha Hazarika was formerly SPAD to Patricia Hewitt and then for Harriet Harman. She was recently advised by a friend that after leaving both of those jobs, the last one second, that she should step away from politics. And so this friend took her to see a concert at the Wigmore Hall, a piece which was called Duo Monologue. And when she asked what it was, he explained that it was about dialogue or the lack of it. Two voices, clarinet and bassoon, trying to speak and listen to each other, but they end up forming their own monologues, neglecting what the other has just said. So much for trying to escape Labour Party politics. And then we've got a late entry, but Liz Kendall, fantastic, who was on that previous panel before, who fought in the leadership campaign, and I must declare my interest that I was one of the people who supported her and interviewed her on a number of occasions. And so therefore I can say, I think, that she has achieved a remarkable double, which is that she has enormous amount of respect across the party. Unfortunately, she only got 4.5% of the vote. So that's really quite an ability. Although if you're hated by Len McCluskey, I reckon that's a good thing. And finally, a late arrival here, Jamie Reid. I think we all think looking rather smart with his new beard. We think that's rather good, although I did say to him earlier that never go out with a man with a beard because it gives you terrible rash on the inner thigh. But not his, of course. Well, actually, the athletic championships are coming up soon, and it's very nice of Jamie to drop by, having just come back from Washington. And we said, oh, you've just come back from Washington, and he didn't mention the plane, but he did mention the Virgin Lounge, so I think we know where Jamie is. He's been at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly in Washington, D.C., and interestingly, he and Liz were both previously Shadows Ministers for Health and Care. That, ladies and gentlemen, is our panel. The first question, I was going to ask a couple of questions and then obviously I'll take some from you. I just wanted to ask, though, perhaps the notes, the chairing notes, I mean, really, as if I'm going to pay any attention to them, but nonetheless, Luke Aker said earlier on that the trouble with being in the chair is you can't express your own opinions. No. I'm going to ask Liz first, and then I'll ask each one of you in turn. But just an opening question, really, is that since 2012, Labour membership has gone up by 92%, but the national share of the vote has gone down by 6%. So discuss, Liz, what is going on?
Unless we are, in touch with what people think, and we actually listen to their concerns and aren't just on loudspeaker about our concerns, we won't win an election. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges we've got over the next 4 years. That's my discussion.
Okay. Owen, what's going wrong? Much enthusiasm at the time when those members joined, but it's clearly not transferring into a popular mandate.
Well, it's been a rocky few months, hasn't it? I think what Labour, all wings of the party, need to focus on is coming up with a coherent alternative that resonates with the majority. We have a challenge of the fact that the last election, the Conservatives only had a lead amongst people over the age of 44. What does Labour have to say to older people? It's predicted there'll be more self-employed people than public sector workers in the next few years. All wings of the party need to have a conversation there. I think these are issues, if you like, in terms of not just being, anti-austerity. The last general election during the leaders' debate, the most commonly Googled phrase was, "What is austerity?" But rather having a coherent alternative that resonates with people's everyday experiences. Labour aren't there yet, but all wings of the party need to focus on that rather than brawling with each other and having what looks on the outside as a not very savoury squabble. And I just want to focus on those sorts of challenges. That's what Labour has to do, in my opinion.
Hilary.
Well, we didn't win people's trust and confidence when it came to the last election, particularly on the economy. But I just want to pick up Owen's point about the self-employed. I first, for my sins and loss, stood for Parliament in 1983, and I suppose a turning point for me was a public meeting I did in Ealing. Now, some of you may remember our policy at the time was that all private employment agencies would be nationalised. Well, it was. And a woman got up and she said, "I set up my own employment agency, I've established the business." She said, "Why do you want to take what I've worked really hard to achieve away from me?" And I remember doing my best to try and explain why I thought the state should be the only organisation in the country that should find people jobs. But I remember thinking as I drove home afterwards, well, no way is she going to vote for us. And I think that was a really important lesson for me. I echo what Owen's just said about being united because, look, we know a party that appears divided is not going to win people's trust and confidence.
But if that's the case, just to intervene on that, sorry to interrupt you. But I mean,
fine.
a party that's very
away.
divided did just win a series of votes in the last elections a couple of weeks ago. I mean, they're very divided. So is that necessarily true?
Well, it's our experience, certainly as the Labour Party in the 1980s, and we have to reach out. But by definition, we shouldn't confuse fantastic support for the members we've currently got, which is really important, and a good thing that party membership has increased, with that being the same as winning the votes from the people we've got to persuade if we're going to form the government in 2020.
Ayesha.
Well, I think what we're seeing is the result of a lot of frustration with members particularly, and certain sections of the public with, where the Labour Party had got to. I think really the Labour Party has been having a bit of a fundamental crisis since about 2007, if we're really, really honest with ourselves. We often asked ourselves the exam question when the crash happened, what would a post-crash society look like with Labour values? And we never kind of answered that question. So I think we are in this very difficult situation now. We have got this sort of impasse. We have the sort of membership versus the MPs, and the public seem quite remote from where we should be. But I suppose I just echo what Liz says. We can't be a party which just comforts ourselves with our niche discussions and our kind of inward-looking discussions. We've got to find a way of reaching out. And also, I think we've got to find a way of, tapping into and understanding the stories of people's lives, not just kind of lazy retail politics or segmenting people by you're the BMA block vote or you're the women's block vote. We've got to find a more kind of sophisticated way of understanding the stories of modern Britain.
Jamie?
Well, first of all, I couldn't really be on a panel with Hilary Benn without pointing out in public that the speech he gave last year in Parliament, or earlier this year, was the best speech I've ever heard any member of Parliament. Because inherent within the speech that Hilary gave in the House of Commons was the question, I think, in part to it was the answer, I beg your pardon, to the big question which I think we need to answer, which is, what is the Labour Party for? Now, in the second decade of the 21st century, we need to answer this question. If anybody read what Peter Kellner wrote immediately after the 2015 general election defeat, he posed the question, if the Labour Party didn't exist today, why would it need to exist? I think we wasted our last general election defeat. We purposefully refused to answer the big questions. We are at risk at doing that again. If we continue to do that, we'll continue to see our vote share decline. And at the heart of that dynamic, I think, and I'm afraid to say, is that we are not treating the electorate with the seriousness it deserves. I think we're condescending it to a degree. They want us to answer these questions, and they see us deliberately refuse to answer these questions. Until we get out of that rut, it's difficult to see a way forward.
All right, well, let's try and, briefly again down the panel, let's try and answer that. Just thinking about it, if you think after 1945, what did the Labour Party know it was for? It knew it was for something called the welfare state, and it understood what universal healthcare meant, it knew what the safety net meant, and so on and so forth. Post-66, what have you got there? You've got the legalisation of abortion, the liberalisation of divorce, liberalisation of homosexuality, the end of the death penalty and the First Race Relations Act, so it knew it was for social transformation and liberalism in some sort of way. Post-97, it knew that what it was about was the combination of the market and the state and actually leaving behind that kind of state economy that Hilary was just talking about. It knew that what it had to do was find ways of regulating the market, albeit it may have lost its way. Okay, so let's just quickly, each one of us, try and define, therefore, going back down the row, what we think it's for now, if you were to write the statement, the 5 pledges, the however you choose to express it.
I think one of the first things it would have to be for is for a comprehensive new settlement for England. I think we need to speak to the English in a fundamentally different way to which we've spoken to them for maybe 25 years. I think we need to acknowledge what's happened in Scotland and Wales and recognise that there needs to be a new constitutional settlement with England. So I think radical, proper, effective devolution has to be what we're about in the 21st century. I think aligned to that is a truly more comprehensive understanding of Britain's place in the world. And actually, I do think English devolution is central towards keeping the United Kingdom together. Britain's place in the world. America is looking towards new relationships. America is, you will have read about the pivot. Hillary Clinton, Sanders, Trump, they're all turning away from Europe and from the United Kingdom, all towards East Asia, South Pacific and elsewhere. So we need to look at who our partners are in the world going forward as well. And I think we need to have a comprehensive, and I don't think there's anything wrong in doing this, and in many ways, going back to the white heat of technology, we're experiencing another industrial revolution. But the difference between this one and the last one is that we are not the beneficiaries to a significant degree, and we need to figure out how we adapt technology in the development of our country and of our economy and in the provision of public services. And I think that devolution, technology, the English question is a good place to start.
Thank you very much. Ayesha?
Well, I think what our purpose should be is actually not that different from what has always been at the core. I think Labour exists to sort of give everybody a fair crack of the whip, a fair chance in life. I think in a way Sadiq's victory and Sadiq's story sort of sums up what the Labour Party should be about. It's about the embodiment of the sort of modern British dream, if you want, which is like, you know, you can be in this country, you can be from any background, and if you work hard, that can sort of pay off for you and your family. But I think we also need to be more in the answers business. I think we're very good at like analysis. We're very good at saying, this is what's wrong with the world. This is, you know, we're very good at hand-wringing about how bad. Where are our solutions for Britain now? So take some very basic things. I think in the, you know, at the heart of every community are families. We should have a much more sensible offer that helps family, even from an infrastructure point of view, to make the economy better. Where is our comprehensive approach on childcare? Where is a sort of family policy which allows fathers to play their fair share? What do we do about grandparents? What are we doing about care for the elderly? We don't have comprehensive answers to these kind of big questions. So that's just one example. The other point, which I think the woman at one of the questions to Jeremy said, unless Labour Party understands that we are not going to war with business and that people in the private sector are not the enemy. They are absolutely should be our kind of allies and our partners in changing the economy. And we all say we need an economy that works better for working people. Well, if we actually want to change
Specifically in that tone.
Yeah, specifically in that tone. But where are the solutions? If we don't get that business is not something we've got to fight with, we've got to make them our partners in changing society and changing the economy. So we need more solutions.
Liz? Don't clap,
Three
it
people
takes
clapping.
I think that the world is changing faster than ever before, and people feel powerless. Many people feel powerless, and they lack control. And I think our mission is actually very similar to when we were first founded as a party, which is to help people to help themselves and one another too. And this idea of giving people far greater power and control over their own lives, to shape their own lives, and not to be frightened of change, but to make that change work for them. And that, to me, means we have to fundamentally rethink the role of the state. We are still too much a party and a country where the state does things to and for people, rather than giving people the power and control to shape their own lives. And as a party, we've never, we really have not got to grips with that. If you think of all of the challenges we've got, still, we have so many people who are not equipped with the skills, the confidence, the knowledge, the networks, the contacts they need to get on in life. And you can't do that without involving parents. It's not just about what teachers do. If you think about the health problems we have, long-term chronic conditions, we'll never get people to be able to live healthier lives unless they take on a greater role. When you think about climate change and people's own role in tackling that, we have got to give people power and control over their lives. I believe that's actually where we started as a party, but we have barely even begun to discuss it. I'm a strong believer in devolution, but if that just ends up being devolving power to combined authorities, not down to communities and individuals and families too, we will not have achieved the goal. And to add to many of the things that Owen rightly said about where we've lost support, particularly amongst older people, that even if we vote to remain in Europe, which I hope we do, there are a huge number of people who feel left out and left behind. Our traditional supporters, and they are in the towns, villages and counties, not just in the big cities. We have got to have a story for those people too.
Thank you, Liz. Owen.
Well, the point of the Labour Party is to provide political representation, a voice and government, both locally and centrally, for the real wealth creators, working people, the people who keep this country ticking day after day with their hard graft. Back over 100 years ago when Labour was founded, those people tended to work down the mines, in factories, steelworks, docks. These days, they're more likely to work in call centres and supermarkets and offices, and they're self-employed, for example. And that majority remains, the whole point of Labour is to give their aspirations political aspiration. It's about challenging the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of very few and redistributing it far more equitably. It's about understanding injustice is collective, and therefore the only solutions to those injustices must be collective as well. And it's about democratising not just politics, but the economy and the workplace as well. And I want to say this because, there's no point me being on this platform unless, some people probably just thought, stop there. No, there's no point being on this platform unless I challenge to a degree. I hope, and I'm here to be challenged, and maybe vice versa. It's my 4th time at Progress. I'm waiting the honorary membership at any moment. But it's an honour to speak every year, and this is a broad church, and we have to learn from each other. I'd say this, though. Some people are angry about what's happened in the last few months, but in terms of relating to this question, there was a vacuum in the Labour Party, and nature abhors a vacuum. And some people, I think, have been not so constructive in responding to the situation, basically being very angry and making that anger very clear. And others on all wings of the party have understood that the lack of a coherent alternative meant that a vacuum was left, and that was filled in the most unexpected way possible. Now, I do think all wings of the Labour Party have failed disastrously to come up with a coherent alternative that relates to the needs of modern Britain. And that includes, when I wrote this piece, I wrote a piece for the New Statesman a few months ago, and it was basically saying to the right of the party, don't mourn, organise. The reality that people are facing across the party is a lack of vision that was filled. So if I was to be constructive, because lots of MPs on the right of the party got in touch to say, you were absolutely right, it's not to finger wag at the party and say everything you believe is wrong. That strategy, with all due respect, has been tested to destruction. Instead, it's to come up with a coherent alternative on the economy, on the future of older people, on self-employed people, that can inspire people. And unless that vision is created, then all wings of the Labour Party are going to fail to win and transform this party, this country, which is the only point of the party in the first place.
Thank you. And Hilary.
What's the biggest social challenge we face? It is to care for a growing elderly population. And our task to create what is called a national care service is as important for our society as the creation of the National Health Service was by the 1945 Labour government, Simon, that you mentioned in putting the question to us. And can I pay tribute to Liz for the fantastic work that she did on that? But that is unfinished business. And some of us in the room have a particular incentive to urge progress on that front because we're heading towards that state slightly. Well, not faster than others, but you get my point. Secondly, education. We need to remain where the party was founded. Workers of the world, improve your qualifications. Because how are we going to deal with a world in which technology is changing by the skills and the knowledge and the aspiration that a decent education gives us? Thirdly, I agree with Jamie on devolution. How and by whom power is exercised is a really important question because there are two things going on in the world and we see them encapsulated in the referendum. A woman I met today in the middle of Leeds, we were launching the Labour In for Britain campaign with a B&Q pasting table and our leaflets. Now, she said, well, I want us to be able to do more things for ourselves. And in a world in which people feel that they are losing control, we are more interdependent, being able to combine the devolution of power, and we'd like it in Leeds, so finally we can get a decent rapid transit system, our trolleybus having been knocked on the head this week. On the other hand, is the necessity for global and international cooperation to deal with climate change, conflict, the flow of refugees. And a lesson for the European Union is it needs to get that people want there to be a balance between the two. And that is work that we need to pick up as and when we win this referendum. And therefore, we have to be the party that says to people, we will seek to help you in managing the change that is going to be the story of the lives of your children and your grandchildren. And as a country, we have so much going for us. When I was born, the global population was 2.7 billion. It's now 7.23. By the time my grandchildren reach my age, there'll be 10 billion people on the earth. We're still the fifth strongest economy in the world. We have great influence and reach because of our language, our creativity, our innovation, our culture, our values. And Labour has to be in tune with all of these things. And politics is about helping people to deal with that change and, in the end, to build what they want, to achieve their hopes and aspirations for the future. And that's what the party has always been about. But we apply those values to the world as it's changing. And boy, is it changing in front of our eyes.
Thank you. And if any of you are thinking of this, the clue to the expansion of the population is in Hilary's phrase, my grandchildren. So just, think on when you go home. Right, now, I'm going to take questions. And I've been asked to take... I don't know how I spread the age and the range of people. You were first there. There's a woman over there in our blue or black and red stripe. I'm not quite sure, can't see from this distance. Anybody got a farrow and ball colour chart? Could they pop over there? I don't think that sort of thing expects a progress. One here, one there, and actually there was a guy there, I think, in the blue shirt who was pretty quick off the mark.
Thank you, Simon. It's always good to see you. You always make me laugh.
Very nice to be patronised by the young. Get on with it.
Oh, that's
And once again, I'm proud to say I'm from Hovenport Slade, which is a rare red sunshine in a sea of blue in the southeast. Now, my question for the panel is, how can Labour develop a strategy for 2020 that allows us to win in the south across counties such as Kent and Sussex, where we failed so abysmally last year, as well as also, regaining some lost territory in Scotland?
Thank you. Over there, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Rachel Saunders from Tower Hamlets, and I want to preface my question by being very grateful to Hilary Benn for his support for Tower Hamlets and local government generally when he was the DCLG spokesperson. But my question is, we talk about the importance of winning power to change people's lives. Some of us already have, both Sadiq Khan in London and in local government. So what do you think the Westminster Party and Progress more generally can do, both to support those of us who are making grim decisions, frankly, day to day, locally in local authorities, but also showcase some of the good work that we're doing?
Thanks very much. No.
Hi, John Paul Charrington, Battersea Labour Party. As someone who's lived recently in the northwest of England for about 5-6 years, and has family in the Midlands, I think in London we're in real danger of underestimating the power of UKIP, whatever way the referendum goes. If we stay in, which I hope we do, there'll be a very disgruntled minority in a similar situation to the SNP. So this one referendum in a generation becomes one every 2 or 3 or 5 years. And we've got 4 million people voting UKIP. Fortunately for us, only 1 MP, but that's lucky. They're second in a lot of places. So how do we take the fight to UKIP and get kind of the disenfranchised people that have moved to them, that probably would have been Labour voters a generation ago, back voting for us and supporting us?
Okay, so we've got a strategy for South, and how do you encompass a strategy for the South and a strategy for Scotland? Secondly, how do we support people in local government in the big cities where we're particularly strong, making grim decisions, I think was your rather good phrase, but also showcasing the positive. And the third is a strategy for UKIP. You don't feel you all have to answer all of those questions. Jamie, you talked about devolution and a position for England. That is presumably might be your answer to the question from Luke in the front.
I think so. I think it's really, really simple. We've spent a lot of time thinking about this and tearing our hair out about this and thinking that the Scots are somehow strange or different to how we might be in England. But the fact of the matter is we'll win again in Scotland when it looks like we can win again in England. That's what the Scottish people are waiting for. That's why they're voting SNP in large part, because they don't believe that we can win in England. When it looks like we can win in England, you'll see the Labour vote in Scotland recover. I think it's that simple. How does the Labour vote in England continue to improve? I think that's got to be about the kinds of vision which Owen mentioned and which all the panel have mentioned, but it's got to be coupled with cliches like sound money as well. People want to know that the money's being spent wisely. Recover in England, we'll recover in Scotland. I think it's that simple.
Thank you. I mean, Liz, you talked about devolution. Again, a view on that? How do you straddle the needs of the southeast and with? I mean, perhaps not Scotland so much, but how do you construct a strategy which is about the overheating southeast, but also about perhaps the underperforming sort of northeast or places where there's more of an economic struggle?
I don't believe that what people in Scotland want is that, or in Glasgow, is that different from what they want in Kent. People want to know their kids are going to have a great education, that there's going to be a good job for them, that they can have a decent home to live in, that their community is going to be safe, that if they work hard, they might have a bit of enjoyment, some money to put aside to do the things they want. I don't believe that what people want is so different, and an idea that we have a different story in different parts of the country would be wrong. Let me just come back to Rachel's question about the role of our local authorities. I mean, I think that our local authorities will show us how to win again, because they are reinventing and rethinking what is Labour for and what is the role of the state. They are not thinking in silos of different public services. They can't. They have to think about how they pool budgets and resources to get the best for local people. They're thinking how they leverage in support from the private sector. And I think it's not just about showcasing what our local authorities are doing. I think we should have, council leaders on our shadow cabinet. I think they should be leading some of our policy reviews. Why is it still led by the front bench and not by the people who are actually making these changes on the ground? And I think those two things combined will be part of our path back to power, because if people know that we can deliver great public services and sound public finances, that we can give people opportunities and chances. I mean, I spent the day in Southwark recently looking at how they're regenerating the Elephant and Castle. I never thought it would happen. Did any of you? But it is happening. And Peter John said, I mean, the housing they're developing there, you know, it was incredible. And he said, it's because I want the best housing for people in my borough. They've opened a brand new leisure service, which is better than any private sector gin. He wants the best for people. He won't accept less. And he will do deals with the private sector to get it. He is championing. He wants that, and he is getting it by working in partnership with the private sector. And he is showing on the ground the difference that Labour makes, and that's what we've got to do nationally.
Ayesha, it's worth just saying, actually, yeah, Labour Council in Brighton has just announced £1 billion worth of investment across the seafront, which is amazing. Ayesha, just tackle the question of UKIP, if you can, a bit, if you've got some thoughts on that. What is the... I mean, the argument is basically, isn't it, that there are Conservatives who have turned to UKIP, but actually there are far greater numbers of disenchanted, sort of core working-class votes that have turned to UKIP. What do we need to do in those areas where UKIP is gathering that strength?
Well, in the same way that we'd like to think that we had a strategy across the country where there should be no-go areas, we've got to apply that to the sort of political discussions we have as well. And I think one of the reasons that people have been attracted to UKIP is because there were so many things, and we all know this as a Labour Party, we just did not talk about. And the big elephant in the room was immigration, and we know that. And so what we did was we sort of decided to kind of not talk about it for quite a long time. Then we thought we'd put it on a mug to show that we had like a really good policy on immigration. And funnily enough, that didn't quite cut the mustard with people out there. So I think we've got to have, again, it comes back to the earlier point I made, actual solutions which are steeped in Labour values. We need vision and we need values.
Like, I mean, example, what do you think we ought to be saying to those people who are concerned about immigration in those areas? What is our policy?
I think we need to have an honest, straight-talking politics discussion with people. Immigration is not going away, and nor should it. We need it for this country, right? I am the daughter of immigrants. We need it. However, we are not addressing the fears that people have, which is about how do we make our public services and how do we make our country cope with immigration and pressure, practical pressures, which make people feel anxious. Now, some of that is, national minimum wage and others is pressure on services. And until we sort of have that grown-up acknowledgement that immigration is here to stay, actually, Fraser Nelson has just written a very, very important piece on this in The Telegraph, saying, look, immigration's not going to go away, but we need to have, as politicians, we need to have an adult grown-up conversation with the country about how we are going to sort of make immigration feel like it works for everybody. So that's just one thing. And just one final thing I want to say, the guy you who asked about the winning in 2020, do you know what I think the biggest thing is? We need to look like we actually want to win. You know what I mean? We need to look like our entire party from the top to the bottom actually looks like it wants to win. And I don't really care about the ideology and the philosophy. I want to win, and you need to win with something, the C word, competence.
Thank you.
The Labour Party's got to get competent again to win.
Owen, can you talk a bit about this UKIP question? I mean,
can I respond to Jamie? Is that possible?
I don't know. Whether you can or not will depend on the audience's judgment,
I'll give it a go.
I think.
Well, look, I'm a genuinely massive fan of Jamie, as I am of everyone.
People always say that when they either hate them or are about to disagree with them.
It's not true. Jamie is one of the wittiest MPs on Twitter, easily, and also.
Please.
Also, as a
look, I think politics has reached a new low when we're applauding a middle-aged man who's good on Twitter. Could you just hold yourselves back for a second?
It's a skill. It's a skill. He's got a great beard.
You're
it was peak beard
now,
in 2014, apparently. But anyway, look, in terms of Scotland, I just can't accept that analysis. And given my parents have been dragged into it, yes, I am a right-wing shift for my parents. I'm not the only one on this panel who can say that, admittedly. But the reality, look, my parents live in the last Labour constituency in Scotland. The Labour heartland of Scotland, as it now is. And the idea, if the Scottish people get the idea that we're sitting here saying, oh, the Scots will just fall back into line when the English get their act together and vote Labour, is electoral poison. And it will be devastating if that message gets across. The truth is, they didn't, all of a sudden, that massive shift after the referendum to the SNP didn't happen because people didn't think Labour was going to win the last general election. And the rot began in 2007 when Labour lost control of the Scottish Parliament. In 2011, that became a landslide victory for the SNP. And then, of course, we saw the referendum. And the truth is, when I meet former Scottish Labour voters, I'm struck by, these are people who voted Labour all their lives, their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents. This is the country that gave us Keir Hardie. I named my cat after him. And this was the heartland of the Labour Party. But they have the bitterness of ex-lovers and the passion of the convert, both of them combined. They detest their old party. And that's a bitter hatred I've encountered of people who have always voted Labour. Now, how we overcome that is very difficult. Most Scots voted Conservative in the 1950s. People often forget that, including in Scotland. And lots of things happened. People felt neglected and abandoned by a Scottish Labour Party, which they thought took them for granted, which is exactly why we can't hear those sorts of words we heard from Jamie today, I'm afraid. And similarly, during the referendum, Gordon Brown, I think, was right, which was Labour should have had its own separate, optimistic, hopeful campaign. Having a campaign that to many Scots seemed to be a campaign of fear, lining up with the Conservatives who are less popular than cholera in Scotland, I'm afraid had devastating consequences for former Scottish Labour vote. Well, people, we're here to challenge each other. That's my experience. That's my experience of people who've ended up voting for the SNP. Yes, of course they have. And that's not... The fact that the Scottish Conservatives finished second isn't a mark of the revival of the Conservatives. It just shows how bad things are for the Scottish Labour Party. Now, the SNP have...
Hang on a second. You're talking about... You can't say the fact that they've put on whatever it was, number of councillors is not a sign of the revival. Of course it's a sign of the revival.
Well, as the Scottish Conservatives said privately, we have a ceiling, but Labour don't have a floor. And that was proven to be absolutely correct.
But they put on 16 MSPs.
They're never
we took off 30.
But they have a very clear ceiling in Scotland. I'm not going to be complacent about the Conservatives in Scotland, but I don't seriously think they're going to rival the SNP for government ever. What the SNP have done is monopolise social democratic ground, and it leaves at the moment Labour having little to say. I want an independent Scottish Labour Party.
No, that was a very long sentence. That's a Henry James sentence. Thank you very much. Hilary, to speak a bit about local government too, since that was once your... I mean, do you believe, let me ask the straight question, people are arguing more and more that actually the real future of Labour is going to come from, as Liz described it, those local authorities, because they are reimagining the state and they are reimagining the notion of devolution and the relationship with people on the ground. Do you think that's where we should look for the future?
I do, because there's an astonishing amount of innovation taking place in local government, and I pay tribute to all of our leaders. And actually, one sign of our maturity as a party is in the last few years since the government brought in austerity, we've understood the difficult challenges that Rachel, people like you and others face, and we've recognised the difficult decisions that you've had to make, and that is a good thing. Instead of turning our fire inwards and blaming the councillors for what is the decision of the government. But we have to get to grips with the big divide that still remains within our movement. Because on the one hand, there is a strong residue of the belief that Labour is about winning in government to do good to all parts of the country once we've got a majority. And the other, and that view can say, well, devolution, it's fine in principle, but people will take decisions that we don't agree with. Now, we have to decide which of those we are about. And with devolution comes decisions that we may not agree with. Now, the job of a national government is to provide a floor of rights and a structure and a set of rules and entitlements. But the great thing about devolution is it does allow for innovation. I'll give you just one really good example, going back to your point, Simon, about the difference between the North and the South in terms of economic development. It still takes you 55 minutes to travel by train from Leeds to Manchester, two economic powerhouses of the north. You always wait for 5 minutes outside Manchester Piccadilly Station to get a platform. The last time I did the trip there and back in a day, I stood for 70% of the journey. Now, if we had devolved 20, 25 years ago, decisions about big investment in transport infrastructure to what is now the Greater Manchester Authority and the Leeds City region, I guarantee you that that would not still be the case. And it's a really good example of how, through passing the power actually back to where it came from, it's not passing it down, it's giving it back to where it came from originally, we can enable people in their communities to build a stronger economy, which is going to help to create jobs, generate income, and improve people's lives.
Thank you. Very quickly, Ayesha wants to come back, and then Jamie did. It looks like Liz does as well.
I just wanted to say, we always talk about devolution within England, but I think pressing for devolved powers within Scotland may be a part of our solution of regaining support there, because if we can gain a foothold locally, show the difference Labour makes, that may help start this long, slow process of rebuilding trust with people that Labour can deliver real change in their lives. They don't believe it of us, of the National Party, but if we can find a way of doing that, and the Nationalists want to hoard power centrally within Scotland, and we've got to find a way around that. I think that's part of the road back.
Ayesha?
I wanted to sort of agree with Owen and kind of gang up on Jamie about what he said on Scotland.
Well, that doesn't seem very fair.
No, it does. Jamie's got Jamie's just crushed our panel, so it's like fine. and he's got his Charlie Faulkner beard. Everyone's got a beard now. It's unbelievable. Owen, you need to get one, basically. But
Let's go through puberty first.
Bless him. So on the Scotland thing, I do agree that I think the problems that we've seen in Scotland are so deep-rooted, and it is a really big warning to the rest of the Labour Party that you have no God-given right to just exist because you have got a heritage brand. And in Scotland, I think there was a big hangover from the referendum, and I think the exam question in Scotland was who best stands up for Scotland, and the SNP was always going to wipe the floor with everybody on that because the clue's in the title. And one of the other reasons why I think things have gone really badly wrong in Scotland for a long time is the Labour Party left Scotland. It is what Mary Black said in a way. You know, all our talent came to Westminster. It was sort of like, if you wanted a bright future in politics and to be a star, you came to Westminster. We did not tend to the thing we had created, this Scottish Parliament. And I think that's what I will be quick, but I just think it's so important to have some continuity in Scotland. I hope Kezia is around for a long time because I think she understands it's a long way back in Scotland, but we have got to get the best talent to stay in Scotland, to grow in Scotland, to flourish in Scotland, and that's how. And it's a really big warning to the rest of the Labour Party in terms of what can happen to a established thing.
Jamie, 2 seconds to reply to that, and then we'll go on another quick round of questions.
Don't actually disagree with Ayesha and Owen about the full extent of the Scottish issue. My point principally was actually, if we'd been remotely credible in the 2015 general election, would have retained more support in Scotland, and I think that's beyond dispute. But I want to touch briefly on the UKIP point. Look, something we haven't talked about today is that UKIP voters aren't evil. They're looking for answers, and they're looking for the answers to the questions that we're all discussing up here today. And it's the job of our party to provide those answers. And there's another big issue that we need to address as well. And for me, in many ways, this is a bit of an elephant in the room kind of issue. And that is the cultural disconnection that the Labour Party has with traditional Labour voters. There's a profound cultural disconnection right now, which poses such an immense threat to our party. It's not true. And if you want to look for an example of how this works and where this has happened before, it's with the Democrats in the States in the 1960s, where it lost all of the southern states, where it lost the working class, and to this very day, 24 million working class Americans vote against their own best economic interests at every single general election because they don't believe that the Democratic Party connects with them culturally. We're heading in that direction. And if we don't address this problem now, then, woe betide us.
Okay, thank you. I'm only going to take 2 questions because we do chat on here. There's one there, and then there's a guy right over there in a light blue shirt. I love the way he looked down. What did I put on this morning, he thought to himself. Do you reckon it's light blue? What do you think? Dove blue? What's going on?
Yeah, it's light blue.
Okay, fine. Sit down. She's first.
Black dress, red earrings, boots.
Sorry, I take the view that women are not supposed to have to do that, but thank you. Looking good, might I say.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about how we use language, because I think that's a key issue that we...
Can you just say who you know?
Sorry, my name's Emma Burnell. I sit on the National Policy Forum, amongst other things. We talk about rights. For example, during the argument about marriage, we kept talking about the right to equal marriage, but we never talked about love. We're talking about our relationship with Europe and how important it is for a strong Britain, but we never talk about patriotism, or very, very rarely. And the other thing that we do, which drives me absolutely nuts, is we think people who have voted Tory are Tories, and they are not. And if we say they are Tories, we never get them back.
Thank you.
My name's Liam and I'm from Ilford North.
Quite loud.
That's worse than my tweets getting clapped.
Yes, that is. Ilford. Come on, everybody.
What Liz Kendall said a while ago is absolutely right about that the needs of one part of the country aren't different to the needs in another part. And we thought that, and the result was the shopping list manifesto that we produced at the last election, the British public overwhelmingly rejected. But we can solve that if we have a look at what Sadiq Khan was able to do in terms of portraying himself as the person, saying immediately what he was going to do and then carry on re-announcing that policy, instantly finding out what the criticisms are going to be of the other side and chasing them down, and also not following a 35% strategy to win power, to win a majority. How does the Labour Party nationally, how can we allocate our resources better in order to do that? Because it seems like the best results for us at the moment are coming in our heartlands, and it's what I heard from one of our breakout sessions before. Majority maintained in Manchester in local government. At the same time, we lose Bury North, which is just a couple of miles up the road. So how do we correct that and actually direct the resources where we need them to be?
Okay, thanks very much. So, firstly, let's just talk about that question first. Hilary, you were like a minister or shadow or whatever it was. How do we do that? How do we combine that national sense of absolute clarity with what are you pointing at there? You want to answer that question, do you?
Yeah, I wanted to, because I
was going to come to that
second. I understand
second.
you to say that you didn't think much of the manifesto we fought on in 2015. Did I mishear that?
It's not that I didn't think
It was a shopping list rather than a
I
coherent
thought
story.
you said shocking. I beg your pardon. Right, okay, fine. It was a shopping list.
Well,
Shocking.
yes. How very, Joyce? I think we can all agree on that. How very, Joyce?
Yeah. Well, this is what comes with age, and I haven't got a beard, and no one's ever called my tweets witty. So there we are. Now, I wanted to pick up on if you forgive me, Simon, Emma's point.
Well, I won't. But get on.
About language and patriotism, particularly in relation to Europe, because you're right, the economic argument is overwhelming. But for me, the strongest argument that we have to use, and it is an emotional argument. And it troubles me that the older generation, who should understand better than anybody else the contribution that the European idea and its turning into reality has done to bring peace to the continent of Europe, is this. You know, the graveyards of the First and Second World War, you see the flower of two generations lying beneath the beautifully tended graves. And, you know, when I look at the front page of the Daily Express, and they appear to have brought this referendum down to a question of the suction power of vacuum cleaners. Seriously. I mean, imagine how Shakespeare would have written it up, Richard III. A vacuum cleaner, my sovereignty for a vacuum cleaner. Now, But it's a serious point. It is patriotic to say, we don't believe this tale you tell of Britain, having sand kicked in its face by the rest of the European Union. We don't believe the image that we're weak, we always lose, we're locked in the boot of somebody else's car being driven to a destination we don't want to go to. The truth is Britain is strong and powerful and influential in Europe, and we should have the confidence to say we are an outward-facing nation. And you cannot, if this referendum is coming down to a choice between, on the one hand, 70 years of peace in the continent of Europe because of the vision of the founders of the European ideal, the Schuman Declaration, making conflict materially impossible and unthinkable, and on the other hand, vacuum cleaners and their power. I mean, come on. We've got a really powerful argument to make about the patriotic choice. The British choice is not to walk away and say, oh, it's all too difficult, to say, this is what we relish. And if we do that, then I think we're going to win.
It is right, I think. Hilary, I think Shakespeare did write about it. Didn't Shakespeare say nature abhors a vacuum? So I just thought I'd mention that point. Owen, you brought up vacuums in the first place, so let's just concentrate on this language point. Bless you over there, but we've done quite a lot of sort of strategy. But let's concentrate, because we haven't got much time left.
Yeah, we'll do language. I mean, firstly, Liam did a shout there for Liz Kendall. I do want to say this while I have the opportunity. I interviewed Liz during the campaign, and it was a bit of a success, I think, that video. And I just want to say, we don't agree on many things, but she's a really courageous politician who stands up for what she believes. She got so much abuse from rival campaigns and also people online, the cowards who sit in their underpants. And she did an incredible job standing up to such beliefs. So I just want to say that. I've destroyed her career now. No, so Emma, that is such a critical point about language, and I say this a lot, progress included, but people don't think in terms of left or right, they think in terms of issues to be addressed in a way that's convincing, coherent, that's told in a language they understand, that resonates with their experiences. And that's me being self-critical. People like me using words like austerity, which are not being used in the pubs in Stockport where I grew up with by any stretch of the imagination. And there's a political linguist called George Lakoff, and he says the right often use stories, the left use facts and statistics, but we're not robots, we're not machines. We think in terms of stories, of emotions, of other people. And just finally that point about patriotism, that is something we have to reclaim. Because what is more patriotic than wanting to rid your country of injustice? What is more patriotic than wanting to stand up for rights and freedoms that our ancestors fought for at such cost and such sacrifice? What's more patriotic than standing up for the proudest institutions we have, like the NHS, the BBC, being systematically undermined and dismantled by this government? There is nothing patriotic about making the majority pay for the behaviour of those people at the top, as this government does, of undermining those rights and freedoms. So let's say it loud and clear. We are the patriots. We want to build a different country run in the interests of the majority. That is patriotism in its undiluted form.
Liz?
The two questions for me are linked. The problem in all political parties, and I think we've seen this exacerbated over the last year, is the tribalism. That if you're not with us, you're against us. That what motivates party members is this sense that it's us against the rest of the world, but the trouble is we need to talk to and with the rest of the world. And, so there is a huge amount to learn from Sadiq's campaign. Of course, London is different from many parts of the country, but what was his message? I will be a mayor for all Londoners. He's the council estate boy who'll solve the housing crisis, not just the social housing crisis, which we do want to solve, but housing in its totality. He's the bus driver's son who wants to make it cheaper to commute. And he said he'd be the most pro-business mayor London has ever seen. That was a message for everybody. It wasn't a message I have to say, as we saw in some of our own local campaigns, of whose side are you on? Let's not ask people to pick sides. We are for everybody.
Thank you. I'm gonna. One more. We're absolutely over time.
But let me just say this. I know it has been a difficult time for many people who are members of Progress over the last year, but I am more convinced than ever before that there is a gaping chasm in politics in this country, a yearning amongst people who want a decent, moderate, progressive party. They believe in a market economy, but one that's matched by action on social justice. The Tories have vacated the pitch on that. It is not coming from the far right with their small little Englander nationalist attitude. That section of the public is there for us. It is there for the taking. Our values and approach are needed more than ever before. Your values are needed more than ever before. So do not give up. It's there for the taking, and I believe that we can win.
Thank you. Ayesha, language, stories.
Emma is absolutely spot on. By the way, if you don't follow Emma, you should. She's an absolute brilliant political writer and blogger. She's absolutely brilliant. And she's absolutely correct about the language. And I think one of the reasons why this is you have to look at who does a lot of the writing in a political party. Who are those senior people? Who are those voices? Who is that power behind the throne? Normally, people like the Director of Communications, the chief speechwriters, I'm afraid, tend to be male, white, Oxbridge, highly academic. It's quite a narrow view of the world and how we use language. So in the last election, we went in, we had an almost weird military style of language. We were like weaponizing stuff. I mean, we were trying to land things. It's like we're not in the army. Like, seriously, we're just, who responds to language like that? Ed had a brilliant idea. It was essentially the living wage, right? It's essentially it was living wage. How did we badge it? Pre-distribution. Now, no one is ever out there going, what do we want? Pre-distribution. When do we want it? Last week. It's like, that's not how people express themselves. So we have got to absolutely get better. We have got to try and communicate in language that normal, everyday people understand. That is absolutely the first thing we've got to do.
Great. Jamie? Actually, just the best slogan that was ever marched under by anybody, certainly in my lifetime, was the AUT. Do you remember this? The Association of University Teachers in 1977 had a strike and they marched down Oxford Street under the revolutionary slogan of rectify the anomaly. Fabulous. When do we want it? Well, sometime at the preconditioned future. Jamie?
Completely agree with everything that's been said there. I'll see Ayesha's pre-distribution and raise you predators and producers. It's the same kind of malaise which seems to have afflicted us for 5 or 6 years now. I think it does go back to the question raised about the issue with what are the lessons to learn from London. And I think one of the big things that Sadiq has taught us is that the medium is the message in politics. This is one of the inescapable truths of politics. When you have a good messenger, you have a good message. Try and ignore that, then you might as well try and defy gravity. Let's be serious about that right now. And with regard to our future prospects, we need to take only one lesson, and I think that lesson should be taken from Michael Heseltine. In 1992, after our spectacular defeat, he was asked, and when do you think it will be that the Labour Party will win again? And he replied, as soon as it wants to.
Okay. I've misread the time, so one more set of questions. Apologies, I don't know who to take now. I'm going to take that woman there because I want to, and that bloke with the long hair in the middle with the sort of T-shirt kind of, hello, I want to join Marillion type look. It's there. It's to your right, sir, the thing, and it's a woman there. The woman there.
Oh.
Yes, I know. It's hard to tell the difference these days. It's all very fluid, but give it a go.
My husband and I are having a domestic over who should ask the question. It's Rachel Bergin. Now, I was the parliamentary candidate in Hitchin and Harpenden last year, and I want to follow on from something Emma said about Tory voters not being Tory, because I stood in what was the 7th safest Tory seat in the country. and I did radical things like go into the Tory bits of the Tory constituency, just to show people that I didn't have horns, and, you know, I wasn't going to kind of blow up the constituency, I don't know. But what I was really, really struck with is that I did not come across tribal Tory voters. I came across people who were really, really glad to see a Labour face, and actually many of them had moved out of London, had lived in Islington or wherever, and had moved to rural Hertfordshire and were like, where's the Labour Party? And I think we need to radically rethink how we campaign, because we're missing so many people who would vote for us if we actually bothered to knock on their door.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name's Dan. I come from Grantham and Stanford.
Say again. Hold the microphone a bit closer.
Hello, can you hear me now?
That's better.
Well, my name's Dan. I come from Grantham and Stanford, and I am actually a massive Marillion fan, and I think everyone more should listen to them. My question is this: you talked about technology, and I hear Labour MPs and Labour talk about technology, revolutionary. But I believe that we actually have a international stagnation, intellectual stagnation within the party about technology. No one's actually actively doing anything. And when you have people talking about hedge funds and them being evil, and actually how they're taking up our ideas and then selling them off to foreign investors, that's not really the reality that is actually facing out there. There's a great growing of hedge funders in Wales at the moment that is invested in the company that I work in that's selling devices into Europe. We need to be more open and honest and actually talk about that we need a revolution in our way of politics deals with science and technology.
Absolutely.
Can I just also extend that question, because a number of people have touched on this in their answers, which is that there is an industrial revolution going on in the way that work is now conceived, in the kind of way in which people are looking at work, at the jobs, and the way in which companies are seeking investment, who has access to it, blah, 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 blah. Jamie, let me ask you, thanks for the question, let me ask you, what should be the Labour's view of technology, and how importantly can we embrace the change without resisting the change? And there was a lot of answers in when we said, what is the Labour Party for? People talked about the idea of the Labour Party being the party that's at your side as change happens in order to help and support you get through that change. So what should our view of the technological change be?
Well, I think the first point that we have to, the starting point in trying to navigate our way towards where we ought to be, is to recognise that society, whether we like it or not, has become Walkmanized. So if you go back to the 80s, and if you look at how listening to music used to be an oral experience, you had to listen to what your neighbours were listening. Lucky for you if it was Marillion. But usually, it had to be, you listened to whatever everybody else was listening to. The Walkman came along, and it changed the world. The Walkman changed the world. It made what was a communal experience into an individual experience. Now, whether we like it or not, that's what's happening right across our universally funded public services, and we have to respond to that, because technology is going to make that happen whether or not we sit in Parliament and decide whether or not it's a good or bad thing. We make the mistake, particularly on the left, but in politics generally in this country, in believing that if we don't pull a lever somewhere in Parliament, it won't happen. Well, somebody should tell that to John Caxton. And somebody should tell that to Tim Berners-Lee, because the printing press drove democratic change right across our continent. The internet is driving democratic change right across the world. Yet the view is, I think, and this is not a symptom of Jeremy's leadership, this exists deeply within the party, that if we don't pull a lever, or if we don't say it can happen or we should allow it, then it won't happen. Nothing could be further from the truth. And unless we get our heads around that, we're going to have problems.
Let me just ask Ayesha, if you've got a view on this, is that where people are working, the concept of work in Labour still seems to be built around that notion that it wasn't whether you went into the shipyard, it was what you did when you went into the shipyard kind of idea, and the idea of jobs for life. So how does Labour adapt when, in fact, what often happens to people is that they get thrown into situations of far less certainty than they used to have? They see that as a deprivation of their rights or their security. So what's Labour's view of that incredible churn in the world of work?
Well, I think that's right. The world of work is completely changing. The idea of just having any sort of long-term job in one place is just, it's going to become an ever more outdated feature. As Owen said, more people are self-employed, more people have portfolio careers. The whole world of work is changing, and I think we still have quite an outdated view about how people's work is structured. So I think there's a lot of deep thinking that needs to be going on that. But just, I think the two questions are quite linked, actually, the question that Rachel said about campaigning and the technology thing. I think we do our campaigning in a very analogue manner. if anyone joins the Labour Party in this fizz of enthusiasm of like, I want to really get involved in politics and I want to get really excited about being part of something really exciting, then we go, okay, you now need to get like an anorak on and put some walking shoes on, and we're going to be door knocking for the next 17 hours, basically, and no one's home, then it just seems like mad to people. It does, and I know that is like one very important aspect of campaigning around election times. But I do think we have got to really fundamentally rethink how we do our campaigning. I think technology is a really, really important part of that as well. But also, like, where do people go in communities and societies? They're not all wanting to come to some, like, boring branch meeting where we go through the minutes of, like, what happened, like, 5 years ago, you know what I mean, and try and catch up. Like, I just think we do need, if the positive thing about what's happened to the Labour Party recently is this huge influx of new members and we have this new energy, we've got to find a way of harnessing that in a much more useful way, and we've got to make engaging in politics and participating in politics much more exciting and relevant to people's lives.
Thank you. Thank you. Liz, is there a conversation we ought to be having which is more radical with trade unionism about how trade unionism exists in a modern world of work? And should our policy about work and technology flow from that conversation?
Well, yes, we do. And, there's been a lot of talk rightly about the number of people who is self-employed. And I just want to pay tribute to community, because they're not only fighting to save the steel industry, they're looking at how they become the union for the self-employed. Yeah. They are, you see, this is what we're straddling two worlds here. When I think about the role of trade unions just this week, got some terrible things going on in my constituency with Samworth Brothers slashing people's premium night shifts, overtime and weekend working because they don't want to, pay more as a whole with the rise in the national living wage. They are still, we've got people being bullied into signing the new contract, staff making the sandwiches in the Ginsters pasties, having to put their hands up to go to the bloody toilet in the 21st century in one of the richest countries in the world. At the same time, as many of the traditional jobs within Leicester changing because of technology. And technology, yes, Jamie's right, it is personalising many things for many people, but I believe there is still a yearning amongst people to come together, whether that's online or in person. And we are at this sort of crossroads, I believe, both in our economy and society, with the old world, it's still there in many ways, but changing, but the new is not yet, there for everybody. And in the end, our people are our best asset, and we have to rethink the kind of skills, knowledge, confidence and competence that people have. We're stuck in a very old-fashioned discussion about education. We think about it just for young people, but actually some of the biggest increases in the number of people buying new technologies are older people, and yet they are completely excluded from the debate. So I don't have a simple soundbite or perfect solution, but I believe we are on the cusp, and this goes back to what I said earlier. We have to show as a party how we try and help people not just cope with change, but shape that change and not be frightened of it. But that means doing things in a very different way.
Thanks very much indeed. Owen.
Well, there was a very interesting article by a former speechwriter to Tony Blair, many of you know, Philip Collins, about technology, and the point he was making is that where it used to create lots of jobs, or it would destroy jobs that create more than it was destroying, like the personal computer, what may happen now is it may destroy more jobs than it creates. And he was talking about up to 11 million jobs disappearing, not just unskilled jobs, but what are deemed middle-class jobs. And that's why we have to have, I think, in the coming years, quite a far-reaching conversation. I know Johnny Reynolds, a brilliant MP who actually supported Liz in the last contest, but he's started to talk about an issue of basic income. That's now, we've got pilot studies going on in Canada and elsewhere, and that's looking at, because work is becoming more precarious than it once was, partly because of new technology, that we have to look at changing the way social security works. So it's not relevant in a sense, or making it relevant to a world transformed by technology. But the last point on that, how have we let Germany become the world leader in so many ways on, for example, renewable energy, high-tech industries? Because they have an industrial strategy and we don't. Our governments, what they do is they have allowed, under successive governments, although it was that well-known lefty Peter Mandelson who experimented with an industrial strategy at the end of the last Labour government, the car scrappage scheme, that kind of thing, but it's been this idea that let the market decide. Industries will fall, and if the market decides, then industries will fill that vacuum. And that hasn't happened in large swathes of this country, leaving entire communities bereft of secure, skilled, dignified jobs for the next future. For the future. So we've got to learn from Germany, where they had an industrial strategy. They intervened to support the industries of the future. They saw climate change, yes, as an existential threat, but also as an opportunity, creating skilled, decent jobs backed up with apprenticeships for young people. Let's have an industrial strategy in this country and capture that industrial revolution for the next generation.
Thanks. And finally, Hilary, last word, swiftly if you will.
Look, technological change is coming whether we like it or not. And I think the jury is out as to whether this generation of change will actually produce an era of leisure or mass unemployment or not. But let's just take one example, the arrival of Uber and Hackney carriage drivers, because it's like the hand weavers meeting the spinning jenny. 3 years to get the knowledge. Now sat-nav means you can be an instant expert. But what's coming next? Driverless cars. Now, well, who's to say no? Who's to say? Imagine a world in which driverless cars become very common. Think of all the people who drive for a living. What are they then going to do? So this is precisely the kind of challenge that our society is going to have to face. And I agree with others who've said we've got to be there to provide support, decent rights, decent wages within this framework of change. Just a plea to any developers in the audience, if someone could develop an app so that when we go canvassing, certainly me, I spend so long on the doorstep talking that by the time I turn around, all the other canvassers have disappeared. So an app which would allow us just to see where we are, and then if there's a cluster, we know the session is over and they're in the pub.
Well, thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. If you thank the panel, it's Hilary and Owen and Liz and Ayesha and Jamie. Thank the panel. Thank you very much indeed. And in the words, I understand, of our great leader this morning, forward to the defeat of Thatcher and Reagan in 2020. Thank you very much indeed.